Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rapping with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon. And before we begin our show, I want to offer my sincere thanks, and I'm humbled by the support that you gave this week in our recent election. You re-elected me for a third term as your state representative, and I really appreciate all the support that Burlington gave me. It means a lot to me. It will motivate me as we get back into work for the next session to work even harder for the interests of Burlington and its residents. So thank you very much. Thank you to all those who volunteered to help in our campaign. I appreciate it tremendously. Well, let's get on with our show,
Indeed.
Rapping with the Rep. I'm here with another rep, so we're rapping with the reps, rapping with two reps, a pair of reps. Representative Paul Brodeur, who represents Melrose and Wakefield. And along with that,
Little piece of Malden.
And a little piece of Malden.
One small part of Malden.
And Representative Brodeur spent some time in Burlington in your life, didn't you?
I did indeed. I'm the youngest of five, and my family, when I was born, my family lived in Burlington. Now, this was before the mall. We left in 1969, and I don't think it was for any other reason than we were in a very small 3-bedroom house, and there were just too many of us, so we had to go elsewhere.
And then you moved to Melrose.
Moved to Melrose and basically been there ever since.
Right. And you've served for you've finished your third session, right?
Yep, starting my fourth term in January. Yeah.
So what we're going to do is talk about this upcoming session, some of the challenges that we face, some of the opportunities that we face, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about the result of the national election. Not that there aren't too many people thinking about that now. Let's talk about our state government a little bit right now. So we'll be called back into session formally in January, although I suspect we may have some work to do even in December. The voters just passed question 4, the marijuana ballot question, and there are a lot of questions that I think both of us has been asked about, well, what can we do now? Can we pass some regulation? Can we sort of form some sort of an organized sense of how to tackle it? What's your sense of what you're hearing?
Theoretically, the options are endless. We could pull it down as soon as it comes into effect. I did not support the question, but I'm not suggesting that is what we will do. I think that absolutely not. The voters have spoken. It was a little bit closer than I thought it would have been, quite frankly. But it was, as you know, it was a 24-page proposal.
Right.
And the devil is in the details with these things. And we saw it with medical marijuana that the state hasn't really done a terrific job with the bureaucracy of that, with rolling it out. And so I think we're going to need to think a lot about not the big question of whether or not marijuana should be legal. I think that, quite frankly, has been settled by the voters. But how we want to go forward is the broad outlines of the law are fine. Other things we need to do to make sure we protect consumers, we protect public safety, and do it right.
Right. I mean, there are a few deadlines within the ballot question. One comes up on December 15th, which makes marijuana legal.
Yep.
Now, currently, it's not criminal as long as a person has less than an ounce. This would make it legal altogether, I think. Yep. And it would be legal for someone to grow an amount in their home. But there's the overall provision would be the access to retail stores.
For sure. The real challenge, and I think what a lot of people were most concerned about as we discussed this question, and as the Massachusetts as a whole debated it, was the commercialization piece.
Right.
You know, we've seen other industries, a lot of people made the analogy to the cigarette industry and big tobacco, and their marketing efforts to reach kids, to reach minors. That's a big concern. I think that's a concern of the folks that supported the measure and folks that didn't. So particularly in the area of edibles, a lot of concern around that, certainly around advertising, zoning, and how much control local cities and towns are going to have over the placement of the retail spaces. That's all things that deserve a little bit more attention.
It does.
I would say.
And as the folks know, I also voted against question 4. Our last Rapping with the Rep show was a conversation we had with Senator Jason Lewis about his reasons and what he found in going to Colorado about the implementation of this policy. So what we can do is look at the differences between this ballot question and what he found in Colorado. And I know the treasurer, who will oversee the program, has already asked for some time to look at how we can roll this out in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and I think that's part of our responsibility, because I will tell you, towards the end of the campaign, one thing I heard as a reason to vote in favor from a bunch of people, quite frankly, was, look, I don't like this law. I don't like the way the question is built. It's too complicated. But my concern is this. My concern is that if we don't do this, it's not going to be legalized, and I support legalization. The legislature will never move to legalize it without the pressure of a ballot question. So I'm going to vote yes, with the expectation that some changes are going to come, that some, again, I would call it tinkering or some efficiencies to make sure we do it right. And I want to make crystal clear that as far as I'm concerned, the voters have spoken.
Right.
And the general proposition that marijuana is going to be legal for recreational use, it'll still be illegal federally, but it will be legal here in Massachusetts for recreational use. That is not going to change.
Right, because there's a difference between tinkering or amending and defeating the purpose of either the purpose of the ballot question or specific components of it that we really can't contradict.
Correct.
All right, we can get into the detail of, for example, the advertising, because that won't contradict it. And that's very important, because you can't advertise cigarettes to children. You can't advertise liquor to children. We used to see marketing on TV. When I was a teenager and younger, we'd see the Camel
for sure.
logo and all that all over the place,
yeah.
right?
And you'd see it in movies, and the product placement and all that kind of stuff. Those things, they need attention, and we will. We'll be informed by experience with whatever we do right now, and we'll also be over time informed by our experience. This is not something that you do and then you're done. We're certainly going to want to hear from as it rolls out, and as we have our own experience with it. There might be other things that we think need to change to address those legitimate concerns.
Right. Now, the Treasurer's Office has said that they expect the regulations to be issued perhaps at the end of 2017. So that should give the towns some opportunity to respond to this, because there is a provision within the ballot question that would allow the towns, through a town meeting, to consider either amending or whether it opts in or out of certain aspects of this ballot question. So, most towns are going to have an election anyway. No, I'm sorry, I said town meeting and I misspoke. I mean a town-wide referendum, which is an election. Most towns are having their election in the spring anyway, so this would give them a chance to consider this question and bring it to the voters.
Sure. And I think one interesting thing about that is there are several timelines built into the ballot question, into the law, because it's now law. And one of those, the cities and towns can opt out. The way it worked in Colorado, I think it was on a county-by-county basis. There had to be an affirmative vote to opt in. The voters had to say, we are willing to have this, much like the casino law. And the way this question was written, it's an opt-out provision. Well, for a city or town to make its best decision about whether or not it wants to do that, I would think, I used to be an alderman, a city councilor in Melrose. If I was in that position, where I would be the gatekeeper to decide, when the question would go forward, I would want to know, well, what are the regulations going to be?
Right.
And that's where the devil truly is in the details. The treasurer has a lot of responsibility that way. What the treasurer couldn't do in the body of regulations would be change that process. The legislature would have to do that, because, as you know as a lawyer, regulations are only the implementation of a law. So the treasurer couldn't, even if she thought it was brilliant public policy, go, well, I know the law says opt out, but I think it'd be better if we had opt in. Can't do that.
No, that's right. She's essentially writing the instruction manual.
Good way to put it.
Of how you put this in place.
Good way to put it.
Let's move on to another ballot question. It was an interesting result this week, question 2.
Sure.
The charter school amendment. Now, it was overwhelmingly defeated.
It was.
And it was
and they were outspent. I was a no on 2 person. We were outspent 2-1 and we won. Well,
Right.
I don't want to say 2-1, but it was not close.
Yeah, the message got
not
through.
close.
Here in Burlington, the school committee voted to endorse no on 2.
Yep.
The voters voted no on
For
2
sure.
to a majority. And what was interesting to me is that we all agree on the problem.
Yep.
The problem is that all of our children should have an opportunity to get a quality education,
For
whether
sure.
you live in one district or another. I think everybody would say that that's the fair way to go about it. The question is how best to do it.
Exactly right.
And my opinion, I think many of the voters saw it this way, is that to create a system where you have some children who have the opportunity to go to one school and another student who doesn't win the lottery and is stuck behind a school that now has even less money, that's just not a fair system.
No, I think you're right. And I think what folks understood about the question is that it was not a referendum on the existence of charter schools in Massachusetts.
Right.
There are 78, I think it is, charter schools here in Massachusetts. They are not going away, though the way we fund them is not going away. The plug is not being pulled. But I think the bigger question you put your finger right on is we have a responsibility to educate every single kid in Massachusetts. And in some ways, the charter school debate has really narrowed that discussion. There are a lot of ways, I think, we can go about that. The charter piece is one potential way to do that. The frustrating thing about the charter school experience has been when they were originally proposed, this idea that they would be kind of laboratories for innovation.
Right.
We haven't seen that work very efficiently. The model was supposed to be cooperative, and for better or worse, it has become more competitive. And I think we need to figure out a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I was reading just today that even the governor now is looking at, well, should we look at longer school days in some districts? Should we look at other ways that, for example, a particular school that may be struggling in a district differently from other schools can have a little more autonomy over the way it runs its school, rather than creating this separate school that isn't available to everyone.
And one of the things that was kind of a hot topic of discussion, a real talking point, was this notion of waiting lists. And as a parent of 2 kids in the public schools, if my kids were on a waiting list, I would be very, very concerned about that. But we have other waiting lists, and I think of a big supporter of early education as a way to make kids show up at kindergarten ready to learn, and also to close the achievement gap. And this is something that, quite frankly, has been studied to death, and it's a great bang for your buck program. I have never heard anyone speak with the passion about that waiting list. I've heard you speak of it. I've certainly spoken about it, but that hasn't captured the public imagination, and that it's interesting because that is a proven program that does a lot of terrific things, and that just for whatever reason, there isn't that same education reform interest in that piece yet.
That's right.
I think we can get there.
Yeah, so we're talking about universal pre-K, something like that, which I think many of our residents know the difference. They see the difference when our kids get to kindergarten, and they've already gone through a year or two in pre-K.
Yeah.
They've worked together with a group of other children, become
Oh,
organized, become comfortable.
Let me be clear. I'm not talking about, driving a curriculum, a academic curriculum, subject matter based down into 2 and 3 year olds. But we're talking about things like socialization.
Yes.
Like those kind of skills, and quite frankly, discerning needs earlier, so that you can do something like you might have access to early intervention, which may, from a fiscal perspective, eliminate the need for more intensive special education services later on. That benefits all kids. It certainly benefits the kid who gets those services, but from a city or town perspective, where they got to write the big checks for some of those special ed costs, it helps alleviate that too.
Right. Let's move on to sort of the elephant in the room, which is the result of the federal election. It surprised most of us. Maybe it surprised all of us, no matter what political party you happen to affiliate with. It was a result that was, it came about, and what I want to talk about is its effect on Massachusetts. So we have a governor that didn't vote for the president. We have a Democratic legislature.
Yeah, for sure.
And now we're left to predict what effect what relationship we'll have now with the federal government. We can't predict that with any certainty. But what's your sense of how things will shake out?
Could have gone better, certainly from a Massachusetts, from a relationship perspective, because you put your finger on an important point. Not only did the governor not support President-elect Trump and stated emphatically early on that he wasn't going to vote for him, and pointed out with some particularity some of the faults he thought that the candidate had, with the exception of one member of the House, no one in the legislature supported Donald Trump.
Right.
Now, maybe that's a symptom of a different problem, perhaps. But we definitely have some challenges ahead of us, to be sure. That having been said, some of the things that Donald Trump said and did during the campaign were offensive, and I don't mean to say by any means we should put those to the side, because that's how he represented himself to the American people. He didn't win a majority vote, but he won. And the fact of the matter is he is going to be the president, and as Secretary Clinton said, she said it much more eloquently, we owe him a shot. And I think
Right.
that's true. That doesn't mean we capitulate. That doesn't mean we don't stand up for our values. That doesn't mean we push back when pushing back is appropriate. But I do think we need to listen, certainly. And most of the Massachusetts political leadership has been very good about saying that. People that were staunchly against him said, well, let's listen to what he has to say. And more importantly, let's listen and be sensitive to the folks that supported him, because there's this mythology I think out there that if you supported him, you were a racist or a bigot or whatever the case may be. I think there was certainly some of that.
Right.
His campaign was certainly almost drenched in that. But I think there are a lot of people that feel disenfranchised, that think he is the vehicle for them kind of getting back on the radar. Those people we absolutely need to listen to.
Right. Well, to have a hopeful side, we know that Donald Trump was a pragmatic businessman. He built a business pragmatically. He was also the host of a reality show.
Indeed.
So he certainly understands the entertainment aspect of campaigning, among other things. And getting attention and getting the TV cameras on you is something that came naturally to him. So my hope is that in filling the role as President of the United States, he returns to that pragmatic businessman, having used perhaps some of that entertainment in his background to get elected in the first place, and sees the difference between the two.
And he said a lot of things, and he wasn't always consistent with his message, to be generous. But there are a couple things that I think folks in Massachusetts who rejected Trump's candidacy overwhelmingly. So there's certainly that. But he talked about when people were asking him about transgender rights. His reflexive answer was, "Look, I don't really care what bathroom people go in."
Right.
For us here in Massachusetts that have had that debate, unfortunately, looks like we're gonna have it again. I think that's a good sign. I think that is a good sign. And he talked a lot about infrastructure. And look, for us, for folks across the country, I think that's good news.
Right.
Our infrastructure is decaying. It's a good way certainly for aging cities in the Northeast. We need that investment, and we need it from a multimodal perspective. We need public transit. We need our bridges shored up, and we do innovation better than anyone else in the country.
Right.
And there's opportunity there. So my hope is that those are a couple areas where Massachusetts can continue to be a leader in national policy, even though we pretty firmly rejected Trump as a candidate.
Right, and as you say, one of the first things that he said in his acceptance speech was he spoke about the need for an investment in infrastructure. And that is our greatest need. Our greatest benefit is our educational system.
Yep.
Our greatest need is investment in our infrastructure because we do have these roads and bridges that are crumbling and need this attention. And as you say, he has said things. He's talked about paid family and medical leave, which is a bill that I filed in the House, as you know.
Yep.
And he supports it to some extent. His daughter supports it even more.
I would say his daughter was terrific on that. At her speech at the convention about, how do families deal with the incredible cost of child care, which is a flavor of the early ed issue. If they're willing to talk about that, that's a great opportunity to not just because the politics work, but because that is something that makes a difference for middle class families across the spectrum.
Right. And
that's great.
Yeah, politically, it gives us an opportunity, all of us in government, to look at, how did this happen? And one of the ways I think it happened was that a lot of voters around the country were looking at the result of the shift in our economy over the last 8 years, say, because they're focused in on the last presidential administration. And they're saying, look, when this administration took over, they bailed out the banks, they bailed out the auto industry, they bailed out Wall Street, but they didn't bail out the little guy.
Right.
And people are saying,
the homeowner or whoever the case may be, sure.
Right.
Sure.
And so that message resonated because Donald Trump gave them, talked to them about, I get that. I get that you feel disenfranchised and you feel left out, and empowered them, because when someone understands what you're saying, and that was what they focused in on. And so those of us in government have to understand that, everyone has to have a voice in our government. We try to think about that all the time, and I know you do too, Paul, and it drives us. But it's a good reminder that
it absolutely is, and it's cliche, but listening and meaning it, and it's really, we've become in some, not so much here in Massachusetts, but there's no more dialogue. You can't have a conversation anymore that people don't kind of instantly get their back up. You're either for Trump or you're against Trump. You're either for Clinton or you're against Clinton. These are still people that on either side that live in your community, that are going to the same church or synagogue or whatever the case may be. Their kids are on sports teams together, and they can kind of get along until, bam, they kind of go off the rails. That's no good.
Right.
That's no good, because as soon as you don't feel like you at least have a shot at your voice being heard, that's when that's a lot of where the anger comes from. And I get that. And I've seen you work in this community, and I don't think it's a problem for you, but I've seen it among some of our colleagues, not too many, that you got to be in touch with the whole spectrum of thought. And I think of Ted Kennedy as a model, and people are probably going, oh, dear God, Ted Kennedy is a model, liberal, blah, 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 blah. But Ted Kennedy's genius, I think, was that he was absolutely very liberal in his principles and kind of his guideposts. But then he got to work, and he said, all right, where can I find partners? Where can I get things done?
Right.
And he did that. His portfolio of legislative accomplishments, and more importantly, the kind of the cast of characters that he worked with to get things done, to make positive change, was not by any means limited to the Democratic caucus in the Senate. He worked with George W. Bush. He worked with Orrin Hatch. He worked with Chuck Grassley, folks that are not on board,
right.
let's say, with Ted Kennedy's principles or parts of his agenda. And I think we do that in the legislature in Massachusetts, where there's not a lot of bomb throwing. There's a real focus on, to the extent possible, building consensus. And again, no one leaves their principles at the side, but compromise is a good thing.
It is, and we work with each other to do that. We see a good idea coming through, and the knee-jerk reaction isn't to say, well, who thought of it?
Right.
This is a person with an R or a D at the end of their name, and that's very important. Just bringing people and bringing things together is something that we're able to do. The other thing is that while we may have liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, is it a liberal or a conservative idea to keep our roads and bridges in safe operation so that they don't collapse? And that's not a partisan issue. Everyone agrees that we've got to have our infrastructure in place. And historically, it hasn't been a partisan issue. Even federally, it's been something that we just do, making sure our schools are the best that they can be. That's not a partisan issue. Everybody wants that.
Right.
And that's really when we go to work, when you and I go to work, 90% of what we do and why you see votes that are consistent are because we're just taking care of our Massachusetts infrastructure.
I think a terrific example of how you can get things done was around the earned income tax credit. That had been something that the kind of the progressive wing in the legislature was always very interested in doing. It got done when Governor Baker kind of signed on, right? And he built that into his budget, so we had an opportunity to do something for low-income working families, to give them real money back in their pockets, help them make ends meet, help them do a little bit better, and help spur the economy a little bit. That was Republicans and Democrats getting together and moving forward a good policy that helps people.
Right.
I think there's more opportunity for that, and particularly I would not want to speak for the governor. Maybe he's been a little bit unshackled. I mean, I'm not sure. It's probably a tough place for him to be right now in some respects, from a national perspective. But to his credit, he has always said, "Well, look, my job as governor, I am focused on doing a job for the people of Massachusetts." The good thing about Massachusetts politics, I think people might be a little bit surprised to learn, if they can get beyond their cynicism, is all 200 legislators and the governor and all the folks that come to work for the people every day, that's their goal.
Right.
They don't agree on how to get there, for sure. And there's going to be fights. Sometimes they're going to get heated. That's okay, because it's important to have passion. But understanding that what we're all there for at the end of the day helps kind of tamp that down. So after that fight that might be contentious, he can move on to the next thing, and develop new partnerships, new relationships to get the next issue done.
Yeah, even after this election cycle, which in some districts became a little bit heated, the governor said 2 years ago, after he was elected, he said, "I get the contest, and I get that we're adversarial in our contest, but now it's the time to run the government. And now it's the time that we all work together for the good of Massachusetts, and for us, the good of our districts as they relate to Massachusetts."
It's kind of what the president said in his comments yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, he didn't have too much good to say about Donald Trump, for sure. But his analogy was nice. People talk about us versus them. This is really like an intramural scrimmage. We're really ultimately, we're all on one team.
We're all Americans.
And that's what you gotta, it's hard. I'm not saying we capitulated, we say, "Oh, we lost, time to go home." Not at all.
No.
Not at all. But we gotta get beyond, questioning the basic intention of folks that we might have a political disagreement with.
Right, because we still are stronger together, and we still have to stay together. Well, folks, looks like our time is out. I am State Representative Ken Gordon. I'm here with State Representative Paul Brodeur.
Pleasure to be back in Burlington, for sure.
Thank you very much for tuning in to Rapping with the Rep. We'll see you next time.